Thank you for joining us today. My name is Liz Kreider, and I'm the Global Membership and Community Manager at Scrum Alliance. I'd like to welcome you to today's Agile Leadership webinar with Mitch Lacey. He's going to be talking about hiring Agile teams. This is the fourth in a new series of webinars that's developed exclusively for members, crafted around topics such as Scrum fundamentals, product ownership, and Agile leadership. Registration is open to members and non-members for these introductory webinars. In the future, we're excited to offer these exclusively to members as a benefit. Be sure to reserve your seat in the new series as we have thousands registered for this webinar. Before we get started, I want to cover a few housekeeping items. This webinar is voice over IP, so listen through your computer speakers. If you have technical difficulties, just log out and log back in. We are going to be recording this webinar, so wait for an email from us and we will send the webinar recording along with the presentation slides when ready. We're also going to be live tweeting today. We have the hashtag SAMW16 for Scrum Alliance Webinar 2016, so you can follow along or check back into Twitter later to see all the conversations. After Mitch presents this webinar, we are going to open it up to Q&A, so stay tuned for that. First, I want to introduce Mitch Lacey. Mitch Lacey is a PMP and CST, and he is our presenter today. He's an Agile practitioner, trainer, and author of the popular book, The Scrum Field Guide, Agile Advice for Your First Year and Beyond. With over 10 years of Agile experience and 18+ years managing projects, Mitch's well-rounded approach is suitable to any business. Mitch has worked with companies and organizations such as Microsoft, Oracle, Bio-Rad, Costco, Demonware, Morningstar, Qualcomm, Salem Health, SAP, and more. As a certified Scrum trainer, CST, PMI project management professional, PMP, and Agile certified practitioner, ACP, Mitch shares his experience in project and client management through Scrum Alliance certified Scrum courses, Agile coaching engagements, conference presentations, blogs, and white papers. Thanks for joining us today, Mitch. Go ahead and take it away.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Liz. And before we hop into our contact, I just wanted to share with folks my contact information. You can find me on Twitter at mglacey. My LinkedIn address is there. Email mitch@mitchlacey.com. There's my office number located in just outside of Seattle, Washington, so Pacific time zone. And find me on the web at mitchlacey.com. So if you have any questions after this talk that we don't have time for, please feel free to drop me a line. Which then takes us to what we're going to be covering today, which is hiring. This talk is about hiring, and more specifically, hiring Agile teams. This talk is based on work I've been doing with clients around the world on how to hire good Agile teams, because after all, finding good people is hard and keeping them is harder. In this talk, we will cover why companies hire, a common interview scenario, what companies often miss when hiring, the results of bad hires, the costs of bad hires, what you can do about bad hires, and lastly, how do we ensure future hiring success? Now, you're probably saying to yourself, why should I care about any of this? You should care because hiring is a big deal. It's so big, in fact, that in 2012, when Valve Software, a computer game company in Bellevue, Washington, published their company handbook on the web, people went crazy. Not only because of how the workday goes or what's expected of you, but also about their hiring practices. It states, hiring well is the most important thing in the universe. Nothing else comes close. It's more important than breathing. So when you're working on hiring, participating in an interview loop, or innovating in the general area of recruiting, everything else you could be doing is stupid and should be ignored. This is a pretty big deal and often flies in the face of corporations around the world. And from this, I was able to conclude one thing, that companies take hiring seriously. And I wondered, do they? Let's take a look at why companies hire. One of the biggest answers I received from my clients was to increase revenue. Who doesn't want a little more cash in the bank? Other responses, some of which I found interesting, but at least honest, were to get to market faster, to keep headcount, enabling future growth of a group or division, to spend budget, ensuring that next year's fiscal budget would be even higher, and perhaps one of the biggest, most common responses, to solve an immediate problem being faced by the group or company right now. To solve these problems, let's look at a common hiring scenario, the phone interview. This is where a screener gets to ask questions like, tell us about your background, or what are your salary expectations, or what's your technical experience in this area? The screener has a conversation, and then through the magic of thumbs up or thumbs down, the candidate gets invited for an in-person interview. Now the candidate is at the company office with a full slate of oftentimes one-on-one interviews. The people like you and me, ask the candidate about their work experience and what they've done in the past. We'll ask about tools that they're proficient in and any certifications, technical or otherwise, that they may hold. We'll ask them questions about how they view themselves and what they view their biggest strengths and weaknesses to be. And lastly, how they've managed conflict and resolution of those conflicts in the past. However good the questions, they never really go far enough or deep enough, as we miss the important stuff. Stuff like team dynamics, communication style, cultural fit for both the company and the team, and most importantly, trust. What I find most often is that team dynamics and communication styles are a component of cultural fit. Trust, however, is part of company culture and needs to be pervasive, as without trust, there can be nothing. This often results in things like poor quality of work, leading to buggy, unreliable systems. People that struggle to work well with teammates, which often leads to bad attitudes, as they think their way is the best or only way, and everyone else is wrong. And there are more. This comic by Manu Cornett at bonkersworld.net is just great. It came out in 2011, and I think is somewhat reflective of the various companies of the time. Apple with Jobs, Microsoft with Ballmer, Oracle with its big legal department. I was discussing this with my Microsoft friends, and when they saw this and I saw this, we both just laughed. When I asked them if it was true, most replied yes. When I asked why, they said it was all cultural. Nobody was aligned, and everyone was questioning everything, and trust was often lacking. Thankfully, though, things have turned around for Microsoft now, and I don't see this behavior anymore, but it was sure a great laugh in 2011 when it came out. There are other challenges with bad hiring, though, aside from this, and that is that it is expensive. In fact, Fast Company did a survey in 2014 on hiring and found that of 6,000 respondents, 41% said that a bad hire cost at least $25,000, and 25% of those people said at least $50,000. Further, G&A Partners, a professional employer organization and HR outsourcing provider, found that costs of a bad hire could be 30% of an annual salary, and in some cases, depending on position type, upwards of 100 to 150% of annual salary. Now, these costs are incredible. But it's not just about the money. There's a huge impact on employees, too. Fast Company found that bad hires lead to lost worker productivity, as well as having a negative impact on employee morale. In a CareerBuilder.com survey, 35% of respondents said that a common effect of a bad hire was the time and cost needed to recruit and train another worker, and that 19% saying that a bad hire has a negative impact on clients. So why does this happen? The most common responses with people I talked to were that the position needed to be filled quickly, and they chose quantity over quality, which leads to the next one. People are not qualified, and they often inflate their resumes. Oftentimes, too, people cited that they failed to check references, but most all said that, more often than not, it ended up just being a bad cultural fit. So what can we do about bad hiring practices and the bad hires that result from it? First, know that hiring is a forecast. Understand why you're hiring, to fill a position short-term or to build a long-term team, then decide what you're hiring for, skills, competencies, or both. Then, to finalize all this, do the immersive interview. This is where we break the mold of traditional interviews and actually have candidates do some work, pairing with teams. Whether they are technical or non-technical, it can be done. Let's dive into this more. When hiring people, companies make predictions based on written and verbal communication as to whether a given person will be a good fit, both culturally and skillfully, in the company over a period of time. Although some organizations do this by having a trial period, most companies in the tech industry hire solely on the basis of the interview. This means the forecast made in the interview has to be fairly accurate. Yet this forecast is only as good as the common understanding of why and how the organization is hiring. So why are you hiring? Is it to solve an immediate problem, or to increase revenue, or to get to market faster, or maybe to keep headcount? Some companies go on hiring binges, where they start out hiring for the right reasons, but then can't seem to stop. I think of this like an ice cream binge. You overdo it because it tastes and feels so good at the time that you're completely forgetting about how much pain you're going to be in later. Brooks' Law states that adding manpower to a late software project makes it later. One of the reasons this happens is because that some companies hire people to mask or cover up larger issues, when what they really need to do is solve the underlying problem. For example, complaints of not enough testers is often a sign of poor test automation. Reports of not enough developers can sometimes point to a lack of collaborative teams. I've even seen people bring in additional project managers to bring a project in on time when the real problem is a lack of team commitment, goals, and business alignment. If you don't understand the reason you're hiring in the first place. Let's say your reason to hire is that you need more C# programmers. Most companies would screen prospective candidates based on that particular skill. Do they know C# or not? While that makes sense on the surface, it might not be the best way to make a hiring decision. Skills, after all, are easy to learn and can be picked up in a matter of months. A developer who knows Java but has never tried C# will be able to pick up C# after a few months, especially when paired with an experienced C# programmer. This assumes, of course, that the developer has an ability and willingness to learn, to ask questions, to share strengths and weaknesses, to put ego aside, and to have the courage to learn new skills in order to best help the team. This is hiring for competency. Let's reverse that then and imagine that we are looking for a very experienced C# programmer, but all the candidates are uncomfortable working in pairs. This means they may not want to improve or branch out from C#, resulting in lost opportunities for learning new languages. Further, they may not enjoy mentoring others or pairing, meaning no one else benefits from their extensive skill set. No matter how senior or experienced the candidates are, they would not be a good fit on any Agile team because of the misalignment of values. This is hiring for skills. Based on these two scenarios, screening candidates should always include competencies: how they think, how they interact with others, and what they value. These will impact how quickly they can assimilate with a team and how rapidly they can learn new skills. Because after all, you might need these same people to learn yet another new language a few projects down the road. In general, you should hire for long-term fit, not for short-term expertise. Immersive interviewing is an immersion technique that relies on screening rather than a series of questions. It shares some characteristics with a technique that I've read about called extreme interviewing from Menlo Innovations, but is not as scripted. In immersive interviewing, teams have a list of items to validate with candidates. Are the candidates a good cultural fit? Are they able to give and accept criticism and feedback? Are they comfortable with conflict? These questions are best answered through immersion. Recall that an interview is a forecast, and how important it is to make an accurate one when hiring. Remember, too, that in the Agile Manifesto, the preference is for individuals and interactions, working software, and responding to change. Why? They all lead to success. Agile hiring should be no different. You need to see how a candidate works, thinks, and behaves in the real world, the metaphorical equivalent of working software. You want to know how a candidate will interact with the other members of the team, and you want to understand whether the candidate is comfortable in an environment of feedback, continuous improvement, and change. If this is the first time you have done this type of immersive interviewing, consider reviewing your company values with the team members who will be part of the interview, and optionally any functional hiring or HR manager. Make sure everyone is on the same page as to why you're hiring, what each of the competencies are that you're hiring for mean, and which specific behaviors the team should look for during the interview. This set of competencies and behaviors might even be something you standardize and write down so that the team members can refresh before each candidate. Then, prior to the interview, each team member will pick one or two skills to pay attention to. One person might choose C#, while another might choose TDD. Each team member, though, should be looking for competencies, how the candidate fits the company culture and values. To filter all this, I create a score sheet that looks similar to this. Here you will notice a variety of competencies or cultural and company values that the team will screen for. At the bottom, you can see the technical skills the team is also assessing. This is done during the setup with the team prior to engaging the candidate. The values section items are the most common items I see teams filter on when doing this interview style. Technical items will vary by position. Why are these important? Because they put everyone on the same page up front as to what to look for. Now they are ready for the interview. Throughout the immersive interview, the candidate will work and pair with multiple people, each of whom is looking specifically at a few chosen skills and at all of the required competencies. At the end of the day, the team will meet to discuss the candidate, but it's critical to capture each interviewer's impression in real time as well. I often see teams create a wiki page or have a shared Excel sheet to collect the data throughout the day. I use a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is the least often observed skill or competency, and 10 is the most. These are subjective numbers. It's a good idea to discuss what each value means so that the team has a relatively consistent understanding of what constitutes a 9 as compared to a 2. As the candidate leaves one team member pairing session and moves to the next, the interviewer should take a moment to jot down the scores that correspond to how the candidate performed. The scores may not be completely filled in at the end of the interview, but you should have enough data to have relevant discussions to determine if the candidate should be hired or not. The last step is the discussion. Think of this like planning poker, but not in real time. Each team member populates any remaining data sets that are missing. Then, once the interview ends, the team gets together to have the all-important discussion, where they share their estimates of the candidate's fit in each of the observed areas. If there are outliers, such as Janine's rating of 2 for C# or C++, or her rating on willingness to learn, or Zhao's high score for SQL, The team should talk about the reasons for the extreme differences of opinion and try to reach consensus. If all the ratings are similar, such as the ones for architecture and design, and interested in finding a solution more than being right, the discussion will be more about general observations than reaching consensus. Regardless of whether the numbers match or are wildly different, the point of the table is to serve as a real-time data collector for future discussions. Do not, under any circumstances, use the table to make a hire or no hire decision without having an in-depth team discussion. Otherwise, you might miss something vital. The discussions are the key, not the table. The goal of all this is to create a forecast allowing teams to be able to make smart hiring decisions that prevent a bad hire. When Valve Software published its employee handbook in March 2012, it set the internet on fire with how Valve operated as a company. The company is flat, everyone is accountable and responsible, and people own their own fates. In fact, they put so much emphasis on hiring that the handbook even states, hiring well is the most important thing in the universe. Nothing else comes close. It is more important than breathing. And that is powerful stuff. Interview questions are great, and having a good set of them is definitely helpful. However, running an interview by just having the candidate answer questions and solve problems will only tell you how well they can interview, when what you really want is an accurate forecast as to an individual's fit as a team member. Screening candidates in an immersive interview environment and focusing on competencies will help increase your confidence in the forecast. Make sure that all team members know and understand the competencies they're looking for, both at the team level and at the company level, and not just focusing on questions. You might even want to do mock interview workshops where an existing team or team members can interview another team and vice versa to teach people how to focus on competencies. When I was a child, I was deathly afraid of public speaking or any form of presenting. I was good, however, at research and analysis. Papers I wrote for school always received good marks, all the way through my college career. It was not until in my late 20s, however, that I became comfortable with public speaking and presenting. To become a better presenter, I read numerous books on how to overcome fears and spent years practicing. Public speaking is a competency. It takes a great deal of practice and a certain mindset to be able to do it well. Skills, on the other hand, can be taught rather quickly, especially given that most, if not all, of your hires will have some sort of background in the hiring area. For example, perhaps the candidate knows Oracle, but you're hiring for the Microsoft stack. The candidate won't have to overcome a childhood fear or a deeply seated habit to learn the Microsoft tech. For someone with a technical background, this would be a relatively easy thing to learn. Of course, that assumes that the person has the competency of willingness to learn. Having the ability and courage to say, I don't know how to do that, can you please help me, is a competency that will take years to master, but can only be practiced safely in a culture that supports it. Tomorrow, one of your actions from this talk is to get your organization aligned with company values, principles, and the competencies you're hiring for. Seek them out, talk about them, have discussions as to why they are important or not important. This is your first step towards avoiding bad hires through immersive interviewing. Thank you very much for listening. If you do have any questions, let's get them out there. It would be a great time. If you would like to learn more about immersive interviewing, it is a chapter in the Scrum Field Guide. I urge you to give it a read, and you will enjoy it. Liz, would you like to talk about the next webinar coming up?
Yes, thank you so much. Great webinar, great content. We do have a webinar coming up May 11th with Pete Barron on developing agile leadership. So be sure to register for that as seats do fill up. And I encourage you to go back and revisit any of the other webinars we've had in the past. They are recorded and online. So thank you for coming today and participating. Thank you, Mitch. And I hope you continue to join us for these presentations.